single day, like I've always done and always will.
Passing these bills on the floor, making yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. It appears the end may be near for negotiations for the state's budget, now 4 weeks delayed. While state leaders have still not yet come to an official agreement, Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie told reporters this week that the policy items were still being worked through and conversations around actual dollars have officially started. The latest budget extender goes until Monday, May 4th. We'll continue to bring you updates on negotiations around the budget right here on the show. And apart from the budget, it's also election season for state leaders and elected officials. New York State Comptroller DiNapoli is facing primary challengers for the first time in almost 2 decades. The slate of challengers argue that New York's longtime money manager has not been doing enough to help residents, and it's time to change the status quo of the office. Meanwhile, DiNapoli asserts that his record speaks for itself. In this next segment, David Lombardo of WCNY's The Capitol Press Room and Dan Clark of the Times-Union dive into the dynamics of this race. Here's that conversation.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Anytime.
So this primary kind of feels like a referendum on the role of the state comptroller, with the potential challengers to incumbent DiNapoli all laying out a vision that is maybe a little different, a little more expansive, a little more aggressive than what we've seen for nearly 2 decades from the incumbent. Can you talk a little bit about how these challengers envision using this role if they were to be elected in November?
Absolutely. So let's start with how the comptroller, the incumbent, views the job now. He really views it as more of a behind-the-desk job, a job where the primary responsibility is auditing state agencies, local governments, local school districts. His challengers see it as a job where he should be out there advocating, that he should be out there in public, making his positions known politically, taking certain positions on specific legislation, being more active with the legislature. In reality, this is a product of actually the election of Zoran Mondani in New York City, where these challengers saw Zoran take on the Democratic establishment and win, and they think that they can do the same thing here.
And I think one of the issues related to that New York City mayor's race is something like housing. And we've seen some of the challengers like Drew Warshaw, who's a veteran of the Spitzer administration, if people can remember that far back, has basically argued that we can use this comptroller's office as a tool to develop more affordable housing in New York, and that the control of something like the pension fund is an opportunity for the comptroller to pick and choose some winners and to invest more in priorities of this government. I mean, does that represent a major departure of what DiNapoli has done, or do you feel like there are ways in which DiNapoli has used the pension fund and its largesse to try to advance certain priorities?
Well, the pension fund in the current comptroller's eyes is really just a pension fund. This is the pension fund for public workers. So his primary responsibility, as he sees it, is just to keep it at a healthy level. It's about $290 billion at the moment. It's not a small amount of money. That being said, Drew Warshaw, who is a veteran also of a national affordable housing nonprofit, wants to take $10 billion of that and invest it into affordable housing. That's a big chunk of change when it comes to housing. It could build quite a few homes.
Sure.
The problem being is, do you then keep the pension fund healthy by doing that? And how many times can you do that before the pension fund gets put at risk? For example, if you want to use, as one of the challengers wants to, I believe it's also Drew Warshaw, use part of the pension fund to finance public utility infrastructure as a way to lower costs for energy consumers. How many times can you do that before you say, okay, now we got to leave the pension fund alone? That's the big question. DiNapoli says, the pension fund is a big part of his job, but it's not necessarily the only part of his job. So he shouldn't use it necessarily to advance all of his priorities. The way that he does policy is more from a broader point of view. A big responsibility of the comptroller's office is to audit these state agencies. So he'll look at specific state programs. Maybe it's an affordable housing program, and his staff can do an audit that shows that maybe the state isn't administering it effectively. Maybe that money isn't being spent effectively. And that's another way to try to advance affordable housing. So it's just another strategy towards the same goal, but not one that DiNapoli has explored in the past.
And I would say the comptroller will point to his main raison d'etre when it comes to the pension fund being this idea of the return on investment, and that his focus is what's going to get the most bang for the buck, so that the employers, in this case, different levels of government, don't have to raise taxes to augment the pension fund. But you mentioned the audit power, and Raj Goyal, one of the other Democrats looking to run a Kansas transplant, has argued that the audits could be more aggressive when it comes to something like the Public Service Commission. Right. And the comptroller has pushed back on this and basically said, you want to be looking at the PSC, go serve on the PSC. You want to do X, Y, Z as it comes to legislation, run for the state legislature. What do you think of that argument, of the sort of, I guess, restrained version or narrow casting of the comptroller's office, as opposed to maybe what we've seen with the attorney general's office, which over the last 3 decades plus has evolved and has grown as its office holders push the limits of what might be acceptable? Absolutely.
And we should note that the legislature itself has passed plenty of laws in the past couple of years, in the past 10 years, to expand the powers of the attorney general's office. We don't necessarily see that from the legislature when it comes to the state comptroller's office. Raj Goyal is right that the comptroller's office could do a whole-scale audit of the PSC, but to what end? What are you looking for there? You can't do an audit of the PSC and then say something about a utility company, for example. It may not have anything to do with that. When you're auditing the PSC, you're auditing the PSC's practices. And when you pull back the curtain on that and see how the state is negotiating these settlements with these utility companies, that's something that could deserve more scrutiny from somebody like a state comptroller. Now, but it really depends on what outcome you're looking for. Are you trying to make the agency more effective, or are you trying to lower utility rates? And at that point, why not just run for the state legislature? I think it's something to be said that Drew Warshaw and Raj Goyal both, their first run at office in New York is to run statewide. I don't believe that either of them have considered running for lower office in Congress or the state legislature. So that being said, I don't know necessarily if members of the state legislature have power there either, It seems like everybody seems to acknowledge that utility prices are too high and nobody wants to do anything about it.
Well, sticking with some of the candidates who have run for lower office before, Adam Bunkadeko, he's run multiple times for Congress, and he, along with the other challengers, have all flagged the state comptroller's control of the unclaimed funds. This is $20 billion in money that theoretically you at home might have a right to, so go to the comptroller's website and type in your name. But they've argued that instead of making people proactively search for money, that the state should be proactively returning some of this money to New Yorkers. How big of a deal is this, though, for voters or the general public, or Comptroller DiNapoli, who has implemented some changes in the way they handle this, in response to legislation, though?
I have to tell you, I don't know what happens on the back end of the unclaimed funds search and recovery system.
Sure.
But as somebody who has moved about 5 times in the past decade, I get real concerned about thinking about the state automatically sending me money.
How come?
I don't know if it's going to land at an old address, and at that point, it might as well not come to me.
And that's a concern the comptroller has raised in terms of opposing proactive distributions.
Exactly. At the same time, I think the comptroller does a pretty good job about publicizing these unclaimed funds to the press. I don't know necessarily if the public hears that. He always has a booth at the state fair,
Sure.
The very well-attended state fair. I don't know. And honestly, I don't know if that's an issue on the top of voters' minds. When we say $20 billion in unclaimed funds, very few people out there are going to have much more than, $30 here or there in these unclaimed funds. I know because I've gone on there several times myself and found unclaimed funds. I think it's those bigger issues in terms of how are we going to make state government more effective for the people that are going to hit harder with voters. And it's really a battle of the newcomers, the challengers saying, Tom DiNapoli, you're not using this office effectively to represent your constituents. Whereas they're saying, we would institute these new things in the office to do that. Whereas Tom DiNapoli is saying, you're just not seeing what I'm doing, which is true. The state comptroller comes out with audits every week of municipalities, school districts, and state agencies. It's just that you don't necessarily care if you're not one of those.
In terms, though, of people aware of what the state comptroller is doing, poll after poll after poll this year has reiterated the fact that New Yorkers have no idea who the state comptroller is by a large degree. I think it's only 30% even have an opinion about him, positive or negative. We're talking about 2 months out from the primary. Is that an issue for an incumbent like Tom DiNapoli? Does that create an opening for one of these three challengers, assuming they all make it onto the ballot? Or is this an issue where he's got the institutional support, the labor organizations are backing him, I mean, pretty much every Democratic politician is rallying behind him? Is the lack of name recognition not going to be a problem?
It's a big problem for him.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example of why. In 2018, Kathy Hochul was lieutenant governor. She was on the ticket with Andrew Cuomo at the time. I believe she came within 3%, definitely within 10% of losing the lieutenant governor nomination, even though she had been lieutenant governor for 4 years at that point.
Sure.
And had all of the establishment and union support behind her. This is the first time in 18 years that Tom DiNapoli is facing a real challenge for this office. There have been names on the ballot beside him before that have dropped off the ballot. This is the first time that, unless these names get bumped off the ballot, that he'll actually have to face a real campaign and a real challenge for the Democratic nomination. We're not even getting into the Republican candidate for Comptroller. So it's a real challenge for him, and it's something that he should take seriously if he's looking to win re-election.
Well, Dan, that's all the time we have for this conversation. I really appreciate you joining us in the studio. Thanks a lot.
Anytime.
And for more on the comptroller's race, you can visit our website. That's at nynow.org. Now turning to another important topic. In New York, state lawmakers have long been pushing for a bill that would help eliminate food deserts and improve access to fresh produce. This year, supporters and advocates of the Fresh Communities Act say that they have a renewed push for the bill and are hopeful that it will make it into the budget this year. Our Elise Klein has more in this next story.
For more than a decade, New York State lawmakers have tried to pass a bill intending to increase access to fresh produce in underserved communities. This year, they have renewed their push to pass the bill and secure funding in the budget. The Fresh Communities Act would provide loans, subsidies, and grants to incentivize building new grocery stores and expanding other ones in underserved areas. If enacted, the legislation would also mandate participation in the New York State Grown and Certified program, which helps connect the state's farmers to the retail food market. Some state legislative sponsors of the bill say if passed, this policy will have a significant impact on the community.
I deeply believe that every community deserves a grocery store, and we need more small business owners leading the charge on that, not multi-billion-dollar chains.
Access to fresh produce in the state varies. However, many communities, both urban and rural, have limited access to full-service grocery stores. In Albany, for example, many neighborhoods are low income where residents are up to 10 miles from the nearest supermarket, according to U.S. Census data. Kaleem Hanna, a Schenectady resident and college student, says he can walk to a Market 32 grocery store to get food, but the prices are often too high.
Their prices are crazy. Like, their prices are freaking insane. Aldi's is honestly I would say the best place, but like, dudes got to ride like 2 or 3 buses just to get to Aldi's, and it could really be a pain.
Hannah says the bill sounds like a good idea and could be helpful to improve access.
In theory, yes, it would be. We would have more access to healthier foods. We'd have better alternatives than just fast food, because I'm going to keep it real. We're in an urban environment. A lot of the food we eat is just trash. Like, a lot of the food we eat, stuff we eat, it's not good for us. It gets stuck in our colon.
Vita Myers, a Troy resident, says not being close to a full-size grocery store is very challenging. Myers says they can walk to the Good Food Market on River Street, but typically need to plan trips with their car to get everything they need.
It is challenging that there's not like a full grocery store in downtown Troy. And like, this grocery store is great for a few basics, but I have a car, so it's not as bad for the people who have to ride the bus and stuff, but there's really poor grocery access here. And now it's great in these 2 spots in River Street, this and the Bargain Grocery. There's some, but it's not comprehensive.
Meyer says the bill could absolutely be beneficial for New York residents.
Any increased access to like healthy food would be great for Troy. It's becoming like a really large, there's a lot happening in Troy that with revitalization, but like food access continues to be like a glaring problem for almost everybody.
Sana Batty, a downtown Albany resident, says she also has to use her car to grocery shop.
When I didn't have a vehicle, it was a lot more difficult to get to the grocery store because most of them are not meaningfully on like public transit lines.
Batty also supports the bill, saying for people who are on a limited income, there are a lot of barriers to shopping for fresh food.
And if you're taking a bus to get there, taking a bus to get back, you can't do any meaningful shopping unless it's shelf-stable products. And if that's not the way in which you want to eat, then that's going to also present a lot of barriers for you.
Some of the supermarkets closest to residents are bodega-type grocery stores where produce is limited. AKM Kareem, owner of Lark Central Market in Albany for 12 to 13 years, sells bananas, eggs, and milk. Kareem says he has about 10 to 15 customers a day who come looking for these fresh items. Kareem adds prices for produce have increased and state aid could be beneficial for small stores like his that could expand their produce and operations with assistance.
Yeah, if it is very easy to produce, then it is very easy to ask for doing this business.
Milton Pina, owner of La Grande Meat Market and Produce in Albany for about 13 years, says the prices of food are constantly changing, which presents some challenges to keeping up with providing fresh produce.
Price went up. It's not good for us. It's not good for us.
Pina says he travels all the way to New York City to get almost half of the produce for his store because the wholesale prices are better than vendors closer to him. He adds that better prices for him means better prices for his customers.
We get probably like 40% my product from the city. We go to Manhattan and we go to the Bronx to get the products, and the rates we get here at some company coming to do service in my store.
Pina says these trips can take up to 18 hours.
Some company, they do selling stuff in here like Restaurant Depot. They got the same stuff we selling here, but they selling very, very high, you know. So we prefer to go to the city. So we get a little load, and we can get, and that way we can give a better price to my customer.
Karina Lee, director of wholesale at Grow NYC, a community-based organization and food hub, says the Fresh Communities Act could help grocery stores and supermarkets handle operational business costs at a time when the costs of food and operating small businesses are fluctuating.
I think that's where this act, the Fresh Communities Act, really would really be impactful because it's potentially able to subsidize some portion of that cost that would otherwise would be getting passed through to the customer via the price margins or the markups that are applied to the food purchases themselves.
Lee adds this legislation could also help producers and small local farmers who struggle to compete against large-scale anchor farms in the supply chain market.
Many of them are blocked out of the large-scale broadline warehouse needs that typically are focused within the Hunts Point area. A lot of those distributors currently that are serving the New York City market are really looking to work with like one or two New York State or maybe regional large-scale anchor farms.
The Fresh Communities Act is currently stalled in committees in both houses. However, many state lawmakers are actively pushing for the policy to pass as soon as possible.
In a lot of places, there are no readily available farmers market or grocery store for that matter. We've had so many close across the southern tier and across the state. So we really want to try to help those grocery stores, especially the small ones that are struggling or those who would like to open and need that little extra push.
We want to get food from the farms to the people of New York who need it, to our food banks and our schools and our smaller communities or urban communities that aren't well served by grocery stores.
Some lawmakers stress this policy isn't just about food security and equity, it's about public health.
The number of individuals with diabetes continues to grow dramatically with the American diet, and I say that in quotes. And usually it's because people have kind of not really paid attention to past and even current food pyramids. In regards to that, fruits and vegetables should be covering up a good third to a half of your plate every single meal. And people just aren't doing it. And one of the reasons why is having access to it.
The bill also has bipartisan support in the legislature.
Yeah, the Fresh Communities Act is a great bill. It's one that connects two really important needs. One, making sure that people who live in disadvantaged communities or who don't have grocery stores or access to be able to buy food locally in their community, being able to actually set up grocery stores in those communities, and also working to ensure that we can get fresh, healthy, nutritious food in those same grocery stores, which would by default and by kind of design set up new markets for our farmers, for our local farmers.
Bills like this support local agriculture. And local agriculture is struggling, and a lot of it due to bad policy out of Albany. So this is one good policy out of Albany that we can all agree on, which is why it's bipartisan.
Many advocates and community members want to see this legislation pass. The Good Food Market run by the local nonprofit Capital Roots was one of the first more full-sized grocery stores to open in downtown Troy in quite some time. Amy Klein, CEO of Capital Roots, says more grocery stores in underserved communities is the strongest path to address food insecurity.
We really believe as an organization that retail food access is the solution to food access. While emergency food is an important component of solving immediate food access needs, it is not the solution to food access for our community.
Some advocates and emergency food assistants agree.
So Feed More Western New York and hunger relief organizations, we work to provide nutritious food to community members experiencing food insecurity, but we are one part of that puzzle. We need to be working in tandem with the public and private sector to make sure that we are increasing nutritious food access.
Rhonda Vesey, a community advocate who spent years pushing local government officials to open a grocery store in Syracuse's Valley neighborhood, says the Fresh Communities Act would make a big difference in New York communities like Syracuse. Syracuse ranks with some of the highest poverty rates in the nation, according to U.S. Census data.
It could help. If it were in place right now, we'd be able to serve produce inside of a community where we are the most impoverished in the nation. We have 6 schools in the community, the 3 senior citizen buildings in the community, lack of transportation and lack of people with automobiles. It very much could be a game changer for what's happening right now in 2026.
For many years, the Tops grocery store in Syracuse Valley was the only full-sized grocery store where residents could get fresh produce and groceries. The Tops grocery store closed its Syracuse Valley location in 2018, leaving residents with only a Dollar General nearby to shop for food. Vesey pushed for the store to be reopened and improve community access to fresh produce. After 5 years of fighting, Vesey saw her advocacy come to fruition. A newly renovated grocery store is planned to open this month.
I am a community neighborhood person who saw a tremendous need, and I've tried to help fill the gap. So to me, this is huge.
Maura Ackerman with the Syracuse Onondaga Food Systems Alliance stresses the Fresh Communities Act will help ensure the work to improve food access doesn't solely come from advocates and community members.
It becomes a partnership of grassroots neighbors organizing to say, hey, we want this, and state and federal or state and local entities sort of collaborating to be able to make those investments, to make the equation a little bit easier and lower the risk for food retailers to enter into lower income neighborhoods.
The bill has struggled to make it out of committee since it was first introduced in 2011. However, it passed both houses nearly unanimously and for the first time in 2024. It was then vetoed by the governor. The governor's veto message stated the bill was not accounted for in the state's financial planning. This year, state lawmakers are pushing to get $10 million in the final budget to get this legislation off the ground. Senator Baskin says she is feeling optimistic.
The state did have a program to address food accessibility through the grocery store development that has recently sunset. So it is my purview, and Senate and Assembly Member Sturpey, who carries the bill in the Assembly, that this cost is going to be budget neutral. We'll simply pick up the investment from the previous program that is currently ending and apply the money to the Fresh Act.
In a statement sent to WMHT, a spokesperson from the governor's office said the governor continues to negotiate in good faith to finalize a budget that supports critical hunger prevention programs. Baskin says while the bill has had its challenges since it was first introduced, she doesn't see that as a reason for the bill not being able to move forward.
This has been over a decade ping pong battle with this bill. So some years, bills that have been successful in the past but ended up making it to near the finish line but then getting vetoed sometimes lose their way when they have to go back what we call the repass process. So I don't think that the fact that the passing of the bill has ebbed and flowed throughout both houses is a reflection of the intention of the bill being something good for the public.
Baskin adds she has re-engaged the assembly sponsor and feels they are a strong team to get the bill passed this year in both houses. Many state lawmakers say while the budget is moving slowly towards the finish line, they feel optimistic about this measure.
I'm hopeful, though. This seems like a year when this makes a lot of sense. We're seeing SNAP benefits dry up for people, or, the federal government is making it much harder for people to get SNAP.
We support it in the budget. We had it in our one house this year, which is a really important step to make sure it's at the table, because we want to make sure that there's funding attached to it to actually be able to put that into action. It has not come up yet, as far as I know, in conversations, but I'm incredibly hopeful that it does.
Final budget negotiations are still ongoing, and while this measure doesn't seem to have come up yet in budget talks, lawmakers seem determined to get this measure in the final state budget. Lawmakers also say if that doesn't happen, the fight isn't over, and they plan to continue to try and push to pass this bill outside of the state budget. We'll be following this process as it unfolds. Elise Klein, New York Now.
Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,